So one of the things at Cambridge, for example, is that historically we had a low proportion of black students, right, in the university.
Boo.
Yeah, exactly. Rubbish. I agree, right? Not good enough. Not good enough. And so anywhere where we see a gap like that, or what we might call a risk to equality of opportunity, we will try to create a program that addresses those issues. And so
Hi guys, welcome to another episode of What My Best Friend Does, where we talk about what your best friends do so you don't have to. Today I'm talking to my best friend, the Deputy Head of Widening Participation at Cambridge University. John, how you doing, bro? Welcome to the show.
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Mate, my pleasure. We like to start with a little icebreaker on the show. What did you want to be growing up?
That's a good question. I mean, everyone wants to be a footballer, right? But so I did play a lot of football.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll come back to that later, actually, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing I wanted to do that I never got the opportunity to do was to be a marine biologist, which is quite a random sort of thing given what I actually have done. But
is that the study of underwater creatures?
Yeah, so I watched a lot of David Attenborough, I still do.
Yeah.
And I was just obsessed with underwater creatures.
What's your favourite underwater creature?
Or maybe octopus.
Okay.
I think they're just amazing. Like so many interesting things about them.
Okay, so you had a dream to be a footballer, as everyone does on this podcast. Yeah. There was a second dream to be a marine biologist. Yeah. You've ended up in education and you're Deputy Head of Widening Participation. Yeah. Can you talk me through your journey to getting this job title, working at Cambridge University? Talk us through that journey.
Yeah, sure. So it really started off teaching. So I qualified as a teacher through Teach First, which is a teacher training route where you sort of go in and do it on the ground as opposed to doing a lot of theory to begin with. So you go in and you qualify as you practice teaching. And so
how long does that take?
Yeah, so it's a 2-year program, and in the first year you're unqualified, and the second year you become qualified, and you start teaching as what they call an NQT, which is newly qualified teacher. Okay. So you're still sort of training, but you're formally a teacher.
In order to become, or in order to get accepted onto Teach First, do you have to have previously had a degree or anything like that?
Yeah. So it is a graduate.
It is a graduate route.
Okay. Yeah. It's sort of, if you like, a prestigious graduate program, and it certainly was more competitive when I took part in it than I think it is now, because you're probably aware that teaching is suffering a bit of a recruitment and retention problem, and so Teach First, along with all the other teaching training providers, are trying to get more people into the sector.
Just while we're on it, because it's rattling through my mind, what's the difference between Teach First and a PGCE, if there is one? Yeah,
good question. So Teach First is the training route, and a PGCE is the qualification you get when you're trained. So PG stands for a postgraduate, so it's a qualification.
Okay, so you get the PG once you've completed Teach First.
That's right.
Look at that.
Or any teacher training.
Or any teacher training, but I got that. Okay, so you're an NQT.
Yeah. So part of the thing with Teach First is that it's sort of supposed to help you move on in your career more quickly, perhaps, than you would otherwise. So I was quite fortunate, I went through a few promotions in my time in my first school, which was just down the road in Forest Gate. So I lived in Bethnal Green, just around the corner. I worked really specifically because Teach First, that's the other thing about Teach First I didn't mention, you have to teach in what you might call a disadvantaged area or a less advantaged area.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I think I prefer that terminology because it avoids a deficit model. So when you say things like disadvantaged, it's sort of like it's making it seem as if it's their fault that they're in that position. Whereas if you say less advantaged, it's more like the system's let them down and hasn't provided the support. So that's just like a caveat.
No, I agree. I love that. I'll start doing that moving forward.
Yeah. So I taught in a school in Forest Gate. At the time, the area was quite deprived, and a lot of our kids had really difficult, lives day in, day out. And my sort of main remit there was working with what they called at the time like high potential students or high attaining students, so students who were doing well academically, but still had come from really difficult backgrounds and challenging backgrounds. And to this day, that's still where all of my interest and focus lies is in supporting students who have great potential to go on to be what they can be, because there's a lot of sort of structural and socioeconomic barriers that get in the way of things.
Okay. So you're obviously working in a school in Forest Gate. How does this opportunity at Cambridge come up? And just talk us through like that transition process.
Yeah.
And what the job, I suppose, day to day is now.
Yeah, sure. So I taught in a number of different schools over my time teaching, moving up to sort of senior leadership positions. And my most recent position in secondary education was school improvement director. So I worked across schools, supporting teachers to be better at teaching, essentially. Teaching teachers how to teach, you might call it. So professional development, right?
As you say that, I'm just thinking, what, you're Obi-Wan. You're the Obi-Wan of teaching. Anyway, so
I still did teach.
Okay, so were you working in a school when you were doing that?
Yeah.
And that was like extracurricular?
So like it's what, because we have school trusts now, so they encompass multiple schools. So you work for the trust, and so you have a trust role which encompasses multiple schools.
Okay.
And so I did that, and from there, during the pandemic, I suppose what it was is where my switch to this sector came from, to widening participation. I guess I was in school day in, day out, working with the kids, had, your 30 kids in front of you in year 11, hopefully you're going to go on and make them get really good outcomes in terms of their GCSEs and A levels. But I still kind of thought to myself, well, like I'm still only affecting these kids right in front of me in this specific context. And the other thing I could see was that like all of these other problems were not within the school gates, like so much is happening beyond the school gates, at home, and other factors, what mum and dad does. And I was really interested in, like, I suppose, having an impact beyond what I could do with those kids in front of me. And so seeing if I could have a wider impact, maybe on a national impact on social mobility in the UK. Mm-hmm. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to do in my current role at the University of Cambridge. So widening participation sort of refers to supporting more people to go on to study at higher education. And I need to caveat, like, straight away that it's not to say that higher education is like the goal for everyone, and it absolutely shouldn't be. But the other way you might flip that around is like, well, who shouldn't go to university? And my view,
content creators and footballers.
Yeah. But loads of people, right? And there's like degree apprenticeships, and there's all these other amazing routes out there. So it's not to say that going to university, and particularly highly selective universities like Cambridge or Oxford, is the right choice for everyone. My job is to make sure that everyone is entitled to make a choice about that decision. Yeah. And loads of people, because of limiting beliefs or where they've come from, just like it's just outside their sphere of knowledge or influence, and people around them don't know enough, or their parents may not have gone to university. And so what we're doing is providing that scaffolding to allow them to make informed decisions on where their sort of career and where their education goes post 16, post 18.
That's sick. And when you talk about providing that scaffolding, is it just for kids to attend Cambridge? Because obviously you work for the University of Cambridge, or is it just higher education in general?
Yeah, another great question. So the answer is sort of both. So it depends, I guess. Like, so one of the things that the sector's really focused on now is on like demonstrating impact, evaluation. And so what I'm saying is, it depends what you want that specific program to do. Okay. So we might work with, say, 11-year-olds, key stage 3, year 7 kids, right? Well, obviously the goal at that stage is not to say you should be going to a highly selective university. The goal at that stage is to develop an awareness of what university is, for example. But also alongside that, it might be developing specific skills, right, that we know are going to be conducive to going on to being successful academically, but also in their lives and their careers afterwards. Mm-hmm. So we work on things like metacognition, which is like learning about how you learn. So
where was this when I was 11?
Yeah. It's schools know about this stuff, but often they can't fit it in within like sort of their academic curriculum. So we'll develop the skills side, if you like. So this is a personal view, but I think schools have gone very focused on knowledge and very much away from skills. Mm-hmm. And in my view, to be sort of a rounded person, to go on to have a successful life, you need a balance of both. Yeah. And so we try to provide, I guess, maybe some of the skills side alongside that. So we also work on one of the big Labour manifesto commitments is to supporting oracy development in schools. So it's how you speak, but it's also sort of learning through speak and learning to speak. So it's not just standing in front, and performing in front of a crowd. It's also about how language affects, what influence you have and how you say things and how you write and how you do lots of other things. And so we try and develop all these skills, and we also give them information and guidance about what university is, and also other routes. So we might, if the students were particularly interested in, say, apprenticeships, like we wouldn't just not talk to them about that either. Okay. Any route that they're interested in.
This is so interesting. And it sounds like great work. You've kind of touched upon, what the role kind of entails, but could you walk us through what a typical day and week looks like in your role?
Yeah, everyone always asks me this when they interview as well. And it's like, there is no answer to that question. My role is so varied, and I work across so many different projects and so many different people, and particularly in the context of Cambridge. This is something about Cambridge that is very different to other universities, in that we're made up of 31 colleges. So each of these colleges is an independent autonomous institution.
Really?
And they sort of collectively form the university, but the university is also separate in some senses from these colleges. And so that's really confusing, right? And it's confusing for students, as you can imagine, to prospective students. So, I can't remember what the question was. Sorry.
I was like, just talk me through a typical day and week.
Yeah. So because of the sort of the varied nature of the institution and the stuff that goes on across it, it could be any number of things. So it might be a focus on looking at how we plan the next event, right? So it might be about event planning, but I tend to sort of do more strategy as opposed to operational implementation. It might be training up staff that I do. It might be working with colleagues across the university and like developing a level of consistency of what we do in this space across all of the different staff members there. It might be conferences in London, for example. It might be, it's really difficult to define anything specific, but I think maybe what might be helpful is how do you define what activities we do? Like what is outreach, right? What is widening participation? What's the work we do? So that might be subject focused. So it might be like specifically to do with, say, improving representation of women in STEM, right? Or it might be about
what is STEM for the listener? I do know what it is, but you have to.
I'm actually getting this wrong. Science, technology, engineering, and maths, right? So yeah.
I knew that Emma's maths. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay,
and some people increasingly are talking about STEAM, right? Which introduces arts into STEM, because there's a bunch of creative processes that sit behind a lot of scientific stuff.
100%, right?
So that's really interesting. And so it might be. So one of the things at Cambridge, for example, is that historically we had a low proportion of Black students, right, in the university.
Boo.
Yeah, exactly. Rubbish. I agree. Right. Not good enough. Not good enough. And so anywhere where we see a gap like that, or what we might call a risk to equality of opportunity, we will try to create a program that addresses those issues. And so, just on that particular example of Black students, like our representation has increased by more than 50% since a few years ago, and we're now like broadly representative of Black population in the UK. So good. And that's what it should be, right? Because my core belief is that talent is everywhere and opportunity isn't. And so if we believe that talent is everywhere, right, then that means that every single group, whatever their background, whatever their ethnicity, whatever, their circumstances, they should be able to have the potential to study at Cambridge, because the talent is in every single person, in every single background. Not in every single person, sorry, but it's equally distributed across any background.
Of course. I think just on that, when I was growing up, my parents always said, oh yeah, read your book, go to Oxford or Cambridge. But it was a lot of words and no action.
Yeah.
You touched upon it at the start, saying the fact that, people don't really know about these opportunities.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that people aren't aware that they potentially have a chance to go to a university like Cambridge?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So I guess you might say that it's to do with careers education in schools, maybe not being given the importance that I believe it should hold in schools. It's increasingly, I think, an area of focus. And now Ofsted, for example, you report on it, but Ofsted the regulatory body that schools report. I think most people.
Everyone knows Ofsted, but I didn't know that you have to report on, what is it they report on?
So careers education. It's called SEAG. So it's essentially what they do for careers. So what they do to support students to make informed decisions. So there is sort of like this whole area within schools that deals with this, but it's often, they're not given enough funding or capacity to be able to do it effectively. And that's something that I think is one of those reasons. But a lot of it is just that, like, if your parents didn't go, then what's your reference point? So that's why these things are sort of self-perpetuating, is that if your parents have gone to a Russell University or Cambridge or Oxford, it's really easy for them to be able to give effective advice around that and like have conversations around the dinner table, right?
Yeah.
There's also a whole bunch of people who may not be having any conversations around any dinner table. Like, there's increasing levels of poverty in this country. And if you're thinking about where's the next meal coming from, you're unlikely to be thinking about whether they're going to go to Cambridge or Oxford in 10 years' time.
Yeah, 100%.
So we have to adapt to the circumstances.
That is so mad. And when you talk about the fact that there's like an underfunding, you said, what should money be going towards?
Yeah. Do you mean in the education system?
Yeah. Right. To increase this awareness, right?
The thing about this is it's all like intersectional, right? And what I mean by that is that one relies on the other. So I might argue that educational outcomes are inextricably linked to health outcomes, right? So if people are healthy and people are getting a good education, likely good things are going to happen for social mobility in the country as a whole, and for our economy, and for all these other reasons that we should be promoting equality of opportunity. But so one of the things I would argue that funding needs to go on is sorting out the recruitment and retention crisis in teaching, right?
Yeah.
If you just paid teachers what they were worth and gave them and reduced the accountability measures that they're under and gave them more time to just focus on their teaching, without all the additional, burden of administration and perhaps stress of Ofsted, and all these other things that form part of the job that isn't teaching, then you'd see happier workforce and you see happier kids, right? So there's that. I think we need to invest more heavily in the SEND, so students who have additional educational needs. That sector is pretty much broken in my view, and alongside that, social care. So all of these things that surround the kids that isn't school, all of the support networks that are outside of school, that requires much more investment than it's getting at the moment.
There's so much.
Yeah.
The UK is so broken. Bro, I hear it. And just, talking about some of the points that you raised there, I think I saw on BBC recently there was a head teacher who killed herself. With an upcoming, because of the upcoming Ofsted inspection at her school was one of the leading factors, is what they said in the report, apparently.
Yeah, it was following the report. So she got a negative outcome.
Oh, she got a negative, and then that happened.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of friends who are teachers. You were obviously a teacher and have moved out of the sector.
Yeah.
I now know a lot of people who are packing up and going to Dubai because they're getting paid more money. They're paying less tax and they're actually working from 9 till 3 and they get all of their holidays, versus in the UK, you're underpaid. You're working 7 till 7. You got to do this lesson plan, that lesson plan, that lesson plan, Ofsted this, Ofsted that. So, you talk about that retention crisis. I wouldn't say I'm living it, but I've got numerous examples of people exiting the sector to try different things.
Yeah, I mean, that totally resonates. My wife is an assistant principal as well and a teacher. So actually on that subject, my wife and I taught in Mexico for a couple of years.
There you go.
And it's some of it's to do with those factors that you mentioned, but some of it is actually just because, that is it's a pretty attractive opportunity to teach in Mexico.
Sun every day.
Yeah, experience the culture.
Look at the bloody fleece I'm in today.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a bit of both. And the thing about teachers is they all care, like teachers care, they wouldn't be leaving the sector unless they really had to, because it's not really a job, it's a vocation. But for me, there's like a level of goodwill that borders into taking the mickey. You can't rely on people just being good people and wanting to make the difference and wanting to be there in front of those kids day in, day out, without at some point acknowledging that you're pushing them to breaking point, and that's why they're leaving. So
I've got a few questions on this. My first one is anything being done to rectify the situation at the moment? So a teacher striking, are there ongoing discussions about increasing pay and improving retention?
Yeah, I mean, there has been industrial action in teaching. I think it's increasingly regulated by the government as well in terms of what you can do in terms of strike action. It's the bottom line is it needs more funding, and so I don't think there's anything you can do until you give them the respect that the profession deserves. If you look at other countries where they are more valued, I think, members of society, and put on sort of an equal standing with maybe doctors and lawyers, or whatever other sort of professions that we would generally go to when we think about professional occupations. And so I think some of it's about just recognition, and value, as opposed to money.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about everyone wants to feel valued in their job, right?
100%.
And so if you don't feel like you're being treated well and respected, then that's just as important as not being paid enough. The pay's actually all right in teaching, I think, generally as a rule. They've had a big increase recently in line with, inflation. I don't think that would be like the primary reason most teachers would cite.
Okay.
It's everything else that we've discussed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on that, and you didn't know I was going to ask you this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
To anybody who's potentially thinking to get into the education sector as a teacher, what would your advice be to them?
I wish you hadn't asked me that.
We've had doctors and
right, exactly, yeah.
They've said don't, do whatever is good for your mental health, because the hours are long and the appreciation levels are low. So I think people should consider this. I mean, you don't necessarily have to say, don't do it, but really consider,
I think what
you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point, right? Mental health, and especially post-COVID and like the stress that people are under. We've got to be thinking about looking after our people in a way that I think has changed since COVID. I think the understanding, and think about a good example is doctors, right? And teachers. They're probably two of the only professions left where you have to go into the office every day.
Yeah.
Like most other industries now, there's a flexibility around whether you work from home, you work in the office, work-life balance, moving things around when you got to do school drop-off, school pickup. Like my wife has to be at school and she can't do the school drop-off in the morning. There's just no way, because she's got meetings from 7:30 a.m. or whatever, right? So I think there needs to be some thinking around how they can make both of those sectors more flexible and work for people in the modern age.
I agree. What are the key challenges in widening participation at a prestigious institution like Cambridge, and how does your role contribute to overcoming them? Yeah.
There are challenges, no doubt about it. So a lot of the stuff is to do with stuff we've talked about maybe already. But so one fact, if you like, is that the gap between per pupil spending between private schools and state schools has more than doubled in the last 10 years.
Wow.
So there's more than double spent, than on a private school student than there was a state school student than this time 10 years ago. So with gaps like that, then that is only going to serve to exacerbate all of these problems that we've discussed, in society as a whole. But access to higher education is a really good indicator of social mobility more broadly. Like so students who come from underrepresented backgrounds or underserved backgrounds who go on to higher education often end up in higher income brackets, and therefore that's like how we define socially mobile.
Yeah.
Now, there's a whole another discussion about whether we should be defining success, if you like, or social mobility around income, right? Because is income the only thing that matters in life? Absolutely not. And people might make...
But it contributes, right? Because to your point, if you're not worrying about where the next meal is coming from, and you're healthy, it allows you to put your energy into other things.
Exactly.
So it's a big factor.
Yeah, it's exactly. And especially when these decisions are as binary as like heating or eating, which is not, an exaggeration. That is a situation a lot of families are in this country at the moment, which is just like, for me, that's appalling in a country as
developed.
So-called as developed as we are. Exactly, right. In terms of specific challenges to Cambridge and Oxford in particular, they are sort of unique institutions in some ways, right? So the reason that the education is different in Cambridge and Oxford is you basically get a much higher level of personalised support. So they operate these things called supervisions, right, where you have like 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 discussions. And usually the person you're discussing with, the academic, is a world expert in their field, right? So you get the opportunity in something you love. You have to love your subject to go to these universities, like in a way that like is beyond what you would at other universities. The commitment academically and intellectually is intense, right? And that means that it's not right for everyone. So that's the thing about, I think that's one of the misconceptions about Cambridge and Oxford. It's like, it's not just whether we want the students, it's whether students want to be in an environment like that, right? It's like, it's not for everyone, right? Do you want to work that hard and have all of this pressure on you academically, and perhaps give up some of what you might do in other universities, maybe outside of that. Although I think we do have a really good sort of balance between academic stuff and all the fun stuff. You know, part of the reason you go to university is to have fun, be independent, learn how to be an adult, right? And that's just as important, I think, in lots of cases. So I think probably one of the big misconceptions is people often think it costs more. Like, it doesn't cost more. Tuition fees are set. They're set, and they haven't actually increased in a long time, which
you said a long time, but you know, luckily that was before us.
Yeah,
but,
right. Yeah. I mean, I paid.
Is it 9,000 a term?
9,250, right? So,
a term or a year?
A year.
Okay.
But I paid 3,000.
Yeah,
right? So, but even that, right? So to give you sort of context on that, is that's the same for almost most universities. Certainly, Russell Group universities will charge that amount. So Cambridge Oxford can't charge you more to deliver that education. And as I just outlined, you actually get a much more personalised and you get more interaction. You
get more bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's true. You know, I do think that's true. And it's also sort of the level of the academics. Like I said, they're often world leaders. You know, if you're interested in a subject, and essentially the best person in the world at that thing is having one-to-one conversations with you every week.
Yeah,
it's a pretty inspiring place to be, right? If that's what you're interested in. The other maybe big misconception is that you got to kind of like be a genius, you know, to go there. Like, what does that even mean?
Even
right?
I think that. Yeah.
But, so I
mean, you gotta have like an IQ of like, I don't even know what it goes up to, but like 140, 150.
So I don't agree with that, right?
Okay.
And I also, like, what does that even mean? Like, what does it mean what is being a genius? What is having a high IQ? Like, none of that matters really. What you do need to do is do quite well, right? So GCSEs, we don't even, that's not a requirement. So we don't look at GCSEs in terms of like a specific requirement.
Swear.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Okay.
But
people need to listen to this. Listen to this. University of Cambridge do not look at your GCSEs as a requirement, so you can flop them.
Let me go on a little bit, right? So it's taken into account as part of like an overall holistic, like, so what we might look at, for example, right? You know, I talked about the schools that I taught in, right? In underserved communities, or the schools that have never historically had any of their students coming out with really high grades, or or a big proportion of their students coming out with the top grades. Then we look at that, right? So we'll say, given that school does not have a history of lots of students coming out with grade 9s, you know, grade 8s, grade 9s, this student has done exceptionally well in that context. And so we say, right, well, they've probably got a lot of potential because they've actually done amazing given like the circumstances they were in. And so we take that into account. Okay. And A levels, you do need to do well. So you need an A star and then 2 A's, like a sort of a benchmark for humanities subjects, and then 2 A stars and an A for STEM subjects. So it is high, you know, there's no doubt about it. But lots of students get those grades. So in fact, lots of students get 3 A stars, right? And or more. And so that's some of it. But the other part of Cambridge and Oxford, right, it's actually like, it's not just about academic. It's not just about whether you can get the grades, right? Because as I said, the education system is very focused on knowledge, like learning, like in ingesting knowledge and then spitting it back out in an exam, right? Whereas what we're interested in is like, do they have what we might call intellectual curiosity, right? And what I mean by that is like, are they able to like think of things in a different way to what you might expect normally? Are they able to challenge accepted beliefs? Are they able to sort of go beyond what might appear like the obvious thing on the surface and look deeper into that, question things, you know, look at other sources? Like you might where something is accepted as fact and maybe taught as that, like is it a fact? And you know, or is there other viewpoints and that maybe aren't aligned with like what people thought before? I
have to jump in here because I'm just so excited about this, because I think this is really critical. We're getting to I'm loving it. What does the application process for the University of Cambridge look like? Can you actually walk me through step by step? So you've touched upon some of the things that you're looking for. What does the actual process look like?
Yeah.
And is it the same versus like Russell Group and whatever?
And another great question. It's like you've done this before. There's an earlier application date for Cambridge and Oxford and medicine, right? So you have to apply it's the 15th of October.
Versus
January for other courses.
Okay.
So that is that's a factor, right? Because
that's why I didn't get in, because I was looking at the January day. No, I'm joking.
But it's a thing, right? And it also means for schools, they need to put their support in earlier and think about it earlier. And like especially because schools start again in September, so you've only got about 5-6 weeks before the application has to be in. So that can be quite intense, right? And you have to get a personal statement together in that time, put your application in. But you also apply to five options, right? And so they also need to think at that stage about their other options, right? Because they can only apply to one of Cambridge or Oxford, and then whatever else. Okay, that's quite important that they can only apply to one or the other. Like some people don't know that that's the case.
And on that, sorry, we're digressing, but this is important. Obviously they're like two of the most prestigious universities in the world.
Yeah.
Does Cambridge have its like specialties, and does Oxford have its specialties? Like, what would you say those are for Cambridge?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. So my advice there is always, and this applies to like whether you should be going to Cambridge or Oxford as well. It's like pick the course, not the institution. Yeah. Like look at the course you're applying to. Don't just look at the Cambridge name. If the course isn't the right course for you and doesn't cover the content that you want within that field, why are you doing it? Go somewhere to any number of the amazing universities that are out there in this country and find a course that's perfect for you, and so specifically on Cambridge and Oxford, right? So there are differences between the courses, and again, that's how we would say to make that decision. Look at the specific courses on offer. I'll give you an example, right? So we have a course called Natural Sciences. It's actually our most popular course. So it has the highest rates of application. Right? Okay. Essentially, it's science, right? Yeah. And at Cambridge, it starts really broad, and then you sort of specialize as you go further in. So you cover you in your first year, you'll continue sort of studying physics, biology, and chemistry in natural sciences. In Oxford, it's much more specialized right from the beginning. It's like, are you interested in biology? Are you interested in physics? Are you interested in chemistry? Okay. And then you sort of go down one of those routes, right? And so some people like being able to go down the route straight away. Some people like having a broader understanding of like science as a whole, and then specializing as they get further down the line. Mm-hmm. So that's like a really important distinction between that subject, right? And so you've got to make a decision based on what's right for you, and also like individual modules within that. Like, is that an interesting module? There might be a whole areas of science that you're not interested in at all. So if the course is like 90% of those areas, why would you possibly want to put yourself through that?
Yeah, exactly.
And that applies to any course, anywhere. But I think that's pick the course, not the institution.
Okay, and then so you've got the earlier application date. Going back to that because I know we digressed. Okay,
so the other thing that's different. So we have admissions tests for a lot of our subjects, particularly on the STEM side, and so they require preparation. They're often quite challenging, so they need to be sort of revised for specifically, if you like. The idea is, I mean, we don't necessarily promote revision because some people might have more resources than others. Like some schools have more resources than others. Some people do, right? So the idea, but you should be thinking about them. Like everyone should be thinking about how they can sort of best prepare themselves. And often these are around the skills that I mentioned, like intellectual curiosity, problem solving, right? Can you think laterally? Can you think about problems in a different way? And so we have that, and then finally we have the interview process as well. And the reason that the interviews are really, really important, because the interviews are about like seeing who you are. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't want to make decisions based on like a faceless, nameless bit of data that we get in. So one bit of data, like we just see how they do at A-levels, and we're not going to so we don't make a decision on that. We make a decision on who this person is in front of us as a human, having had a discussion with them about their like sort of intellectual curiosity, their academic potential to thrive in somewhere like Cambridge, right? Mm-hmm. It's also not just about like what their potential might be. It's about what their potential might be given the system that we operate, like given this intense 1-to-2, 1-to-3 supervision nature. So are they going to thrive in that environment? Is it right for them? Are we right? Are we right for them? Are they right for us?
Yeah.
It's like a two-way thing.
I've got so many. I keep saying it, but I'm just going to come out with a question. So when we go from the application to the exam to the interview, if we start with 100% is everybody, how many people make it through the stages? Are you allowed to share?
Yeah. So it's like publicly available information. Okay. So the overall success rate is like somewhere between 1 in 5, 1 in 6. Okay. So it's pretty, like compared to say US universities, it's much less competitive actually than a lot of the leading Ivy League universities in the US, right? So the other thing is that most students who apply will be offered an interview. So about 80%, right? So
Sick.
most students who apply, 80%, like a lot of them, these figures change, year on year. And there's factors around COVID and increasing population growth, like all these sort of, I won't bore you with all the technical stuff, but
thank you.
But most students, if you apply, you're very likely to get an interview, right?
Okay.
And that means that you're going to get a chance to see whether it's right for you and whether you're right for us, and have this sort of intellectual conversation. Because the whole point of people also get really stressed about the interview, right? They think it's like kind of like being put on the spot and being grilled, like in an interrogation room, in dark lights with like, I don't know, torture instruments on the wall. It's like nothing like that at all. The whole point of the interview is to see if that style of learning is going to be right for you. Mm-hmm. Like if you don't like it in the interview, then you're probably not going to like it when you're sitting there doing it every week. So I think the idea is just to give you a taste of like how we try to get students to learn best.
So to any potential people looking to apply to Cambridge and listening to this, what would your advice be to them if they make it to this interview stage?
Yeah, so I would say you've got to really love your subject, right? Like I kind of said, like we are, it's really, really obvious when you get to the interview in particular, like who's trying it on, if you like, and who really does have the passion for their subject. And
because they got like the quirky responses.
Yeah, like it just comes through because it's like everything about them is loves that subject, and so they like, it's not, they don't have to, it's not like it just flows freely, and you can see it in their eyes, that they are absolutely in love with their subjects and they want to explore it, and they're so excited about like looking at all these different parts of it and different areas of it. And there are students like that from anywhere, from any background, who just haven't been given the opportunity, like we were saying, all those other things about finally getting to an environment where like they can just like love their subject and thrive. If you one of the things that we often find, right, that can be really difficult, you talked about specific challenges, is like imposter syndrome, right? People feeling like they don't belong in environments like that, and particularly, right, for some of our students who come from places where like they might have been by far the brightest
big fish in a small pond.
Yeah, exactly, right. Big fish in a small pond. Yeah. I'm not sure about big, but you know what I mean, right? Yeah. But they achieve really, really highly compared to their peers in their context, and then they come in to an environment where they might be like middle of the road, or maybe like bottom third of their cohort in terms of like achievement at that stage. That can be really, really tough. Not just for students from state schools or from particularly underrepresented backgrounds, but for like the kids who go to Eton. The same thing happens to everyone. And sort of in that sense, it levels the playing field completely, because you're suddenly just around people. What tends to happen is that they suddenly realize that they have all these other people around them who they can like thrive off, because they bounce ideas off each other. They're suddenly got meeting people who have similar like outlooks, similar interests. And that's why it can be an incredibly stimulating place to go and learn, because everyone is in the same boat in terms of like the passion for their subject and wanting to learn more about it.
I'm with you. Yeah. So advice to anybody who gets through to the interview stage, just bloody love what you do, because they will see through it. They got X-ray. Those glasses are X-ray. You see, it's BS glasses, sponsored by Cambridge. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that.
The other two questions I had. So we've spoken about the fact that like the acceptance rate, right? It isn't all based on your academics. Does that also translate to the exam, right? So obviously people have to revise. Sorry, if they don't do as well, is there upbringing, background, and that taken into account?
So again, really good question. So there are certain points where where students might be deselected for whatever reason, but the overall process is specifically designed to be holistic, as in to take into account all of these different factors.
Understood.
So no single decision will be based on one single thing. And that's also like really important in terms of like avoiding accusations of bias. So it won't be a single interviewer who didn't like you on that day. It's like there'll always be multiple interviews and multiple interviewers, so that to make sure there's quality assurance, and that everyone's been given that fair chance.
100%. And then I actually wanted to skip forward. So you mentioned the fact that the course can be quite intense, right? And people need to consider whether it's for them as much as you consider whether they are for you. Yeah. For people from underrepresented backgrounds, let's say they're on a very intensive course. Yeah. Are they provided the adequate support so they don't need to work a job and, have to work on the weekends, and they can actually fully apply themselves to the course?
Yeah. So that's again a great question. So students aren't actually allowed to work in term time. Wow. At Cambridge, like that, so that specifically for that reason, because we want them to focus on their university experience, right? We want them to focus on their studies, but also to focus on becoming a young adult and becoming independent and making friends and all the social side and all of that other stuff that goes with going to university. And what we do to mitigate that is provide really, really substantial financial support, right? So there's like a sliding scale for the Cambridge bursary scheme. So essentially, if your family income is below a certain amount, you're going to get some support and maintenance. The sort of golden rule, if you like, is that money should never be the reason that you not think about applying to Cambridge or Oxford, right? We want to try and remove financial barriers absolutely as a means of so one of the things we do is like accommodation is heavily subsidized, right? Cambridge, I live in Cambridge, right? As an adult, as a worker, incredibly expensive place to live. It's as expensive as London, right? However, for students, it's one of the cheapest places in the country to go to university because accommodation is so subsidized, food's subsidized. You get put in university accommodation for the whole time you're at Cambridge. So you're
always on campus.
Yeah, undergraduate students, right? So always on campus. Yeah, if you have some choice, some flexibility in your final years if you want to. Most students stay for the whole time, right? And also there's all these grants and awards and bursaries that you can apply for. So the thing I actually haven't mentioned yet is that you apply to a college, not the university. So you apply to one of these 31 colleges, not the university.
Okay.
But in some cases, if you aren't successful at getting into that college because they filled their quota of some kind, right, for whatever subject, for whatever reason, that the students go into something called the pool, and the pool is like a way of other colleges taking students who clearly have the potential to do really well at Cambridge and be accepted into other colleges. So like there's all these fail safes, all these safety nets to make sure that people don't slip through the net, and part of that is making sure that finance is looked after.
Sick. If you don't get into one college, but you get into another, like do different colleges offer different courses?
No.
So you can go to whatever college and still do the course?
Exactly. Yeah.
Bloody hell. Yeah. So I knew that. Maybe I ain't got what it takes to get to Cambridge because I can't even get my head around this.
It's pretty confusing.
Yeah.
And to be honest, not all colleges offer every course, but most offer most courses. Right?
Okay.
So the thing with that is that essentially, so the thing about choosing a college, right, is like more about like where you want to live. So the colleges
sounds like a fraternity.
Colleges is where
he doesn't want to agree. Sorry, go
it's like colleges where you live,
and
where you eat and where you sleep, right? Okay. And the academic departments, they're separate. Okay. So where you study is separated from where you sort of live and where you often make friends and stuff. But people make friends on the subjects too, on the departments. And the differences between them is things like, is it in the center of town or is it in the edge of town? Is it a small college where you've got like a family atmosphere where you know everyone? Or do you not want that? Because sometimes, let's say you're in a cohort of 30. What if you don't like any of those 30 people? And so some people choose to go to bigger colleges where there's more students and so different. And some of the colleges are like, the Harry Potter ones that everyone thinks of when they think about Cambridge. Some of them aren't at all. Okay. So some of them are much more modern and so it's like, what do you want from the place you live?
I'm with you.
Some of them have swimming pools and some of them don't, Yeah.
These people in Cambridge are living good. My final question on this, and then we'll come back. But
the students, by the way.
I've been loving this. No, is you mentioned the fact that people have to love what they do, right, to be accepted. How much switching of courses happen? Because I know for me, when I was at university, people come. Maybe they came because they just wanted to get accepted into university, and they're like, I'll actually get to switch on to what I can do. With the rigorous process that happens at Cambridge, is there that chance to switch between courses? Yeah,
the answer is yes, but I think generally because of the process and sort of how intensive,
rigorous it is.
How rigorous, that's a better word actually, how rigorous that process is, often they don't change. But there is flexibility within that because, we don't get everything right every time, right? And the other thing with Cambridge and Oxford, I think a lot of people don't know, is that our course completion rate is really, really high. So despite the expectations, academically, almost all our students will end their time, they'll complete their degree, right? And that's not the case in lots of other places.
100%.
Yeah. So that's because of the support networks that are around there. And that's not just financially, right? So we also have, counsellors, welfare support, we have mental health support, we have a disability resource centre, we have all of these things that go around the core academic experience designed to make sure that they feel as supported as possible.
Can you highlight some successful outreach activities or projects that have had a significant impact on increasing access for underrepresented groups?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you can imagine, I can probably refer to a few.
Yeah.
But again, like it depends what type of outreach activity it might be, right? So one program that I started really early on when I moved into this sector was a program called Love Languages, which was designed to increase languages uptake at A level. So one of the things with languages in this country is that it's declined hugely, right? But one of the highest declines in university study and in A level study out of any subject, right? And that's partly to do with Brexit, and it's partly to do with the curriculum in schools, and it's partly to do with a range of factors around like how we perceive other people, otherness, right, and foreign people, and cultural factors, right? So there's all this stuff that goes into it. But a big part for me is that because I taught year 11 French like in the year before I moved across to Trinity College, which is where I first started working in WP. Widening participation. And so we created this program called Love Languages. It was all online because it was in the pandemic. And what we wanted to do was get students to take languages as an A level, and also refine that like what languages is for. It's not just about learning grammar and learning vocabulary. It's about cultures. It's about empathy. It's about, a window into other people's cultures, right? And so we ran this program. It was amazing. We had academics involved, like alumni, students, all of these amazing inspirational people, and 93% I think of that cohort. We had like thousands of students on this online program, because that's the great thing about online, right?
Anyone can join.
Suddenly geography is nothing. And so we had students from all over the UK taking part, and like 93% of these students went on to take a languages A level against like, I can't remember what it was, but like a tiny proportion who otherwise would have done if, in the population, right? And we did a similar scheme for called Easy as Pie for maths, right? For women in maths.
Yeah.
I know the name is.
That
was my name.
Yeah.
I was proud of it at the time. Now it's just like completely embarrassing.
Yeah. No, it's good. It's good.
So yeah, and similar sort of uptake in people who are identified as female taking maths at A level, which is underrepresented, hugely. And so that's like not even about university at that point. It's about making sure the pool is there for them to go on to study if they want to for higher education. So that they were successful. We also like run big national programs. So we operate a summer school program that's like 3 weeks in the summer. It's across a range of subject areas for year 12 students who are thinking about going to sort of a university, or generally a highly selective university, who usually hit what we might call flags. So flags are the sort of targeting criteria that we use. So, whether your parents have gone to university, whether you eligible for free school meals, whether you have experience of the care system, whether you've been a young carer yourself, whether you've experienced educational disruption, whether you have come to this country as a refugee or forced migrant, or lots of these sort of factors come into it. And also like, the school context and all that stuff we talked about earlier. And loads of these students go on to do amazing things at amazing universities, from taking part in like the summer schools and all these other programs that we do. I might just talk about one sort of a bit more unusual program, if you like.
Yeah, please.
I think we've focused very much so far, like talking about the students, talking about the young people, whereas I mentioned that parents and carers, right? And so there's such an important factor. So there's a Institute for Fiscal Studies study, right? And they look at factors that affect socioeconomic, the differences in attainment at age 11, right? So how kids are doing it in school at age 11. 14% of the factors are related to what's happening in a school, and about 50% of the factors are to do with parents and parental engagement and parental knowledge and parental involvement and like their level of education and so on. So for me, it was absolutely critical that we did a body of work and had programs that were working with parents and carers, because they were so influential in the outcomes of these young people. So there was a program called Parent Power that was initially piloted in South London. And then I got involved with the second chapter that was in Oldham, working with parents in Oldham. And since then, I've set up chapters in Fenland, which is a rural area just outside Cambridge, in Peterborough. And there's chapters now all over the UK. And it's an amazing thing. And we run it with this charity called the Brilliant Club, and also with Citizens UK, who are a community organising charity, and other universities as well. So like it's a local partner university with wherever usually the chapter is. Mm-hmm. But the thing about Parent Power that's amazing is, yes, we do all this access to higher education. We give them information and guidance. Parents are really worried about money often, so financial implications of university. Busting some of those myths we talked about earlier is really important. But the other thing we do on Parent Power is we develop the parents as leaders. And what we want them to do as leaders is to influence, other people in the community, other parents, other carers at the school gates, in ASDA, like whatever, right? Where they're having these informal conversations about the expert knowledge that they've gained through the program. But the other thing is about making them sort of change makers in their community. So they take on really localized issues relating to barriers to higher education or education in general, things that are affecting in their region, being able to go and do something or other to do with education. So
this is sick.
I'll try and give you an example because it's kind of complicated. But that first chapter in Oldham, right, during the pandemic, we had these parents and they were really worried about the cost of school uniform. And so they campaigned on school uniform and they met with the mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, Deborah Abrahams, who was an MP up there. So you can imagine these parents who had never felt listened to, who had never felt like they had any power, were suddenly sitting in a meeting with some of the most influential policy, decision makers, political decision makers in their region, right? And they were holding them to account. They were saying like, this isn't right. We should be doing more of this, right? And so they felt listened to, and then they campaign against the thing to do with school uniform. Or in Finland, where we have the chapter there with the parents, right? So very recently, we met with the mayor of the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority. And again, like amazing, these parents are in the room with the mayor, who is obviously influential in decision-making in various aspects to do with lots of things. But one of the things that he can do something about is transport, because this is a rural area, right? And the reason these parents were angry was because their kids couldn't get to extracurricular activities after school, right? The bus ran once in the morning and once when the school bell went, right? So if there was stuff going on after school, which may well have a huge influence on what they put in their personal statement, what they go on to do, they're opening up to all this information and guidance and opportunity that we've talked about, they couldn't do it because they had to get on the bus, right? And so one of the things that these parents have been doing is campaigning for a cycle lane that connects Guyherne and March, which is like 2 villages in Finland, so that their kids are able to go back and forth and go and take part in educational opportunities in their area, right? And that's like, you wouldn't think that something like a cycle path is a barrier to educational opportunity, but in their specific context, it is. Mm-hmm. And so we will encourage them to go and do whatever it is.
How do you find these places that need this help? Because I know for a fact that help is needed everywhere. How do you decide that, okay, this is where we're going to make the biggest impact? Is it they come find you? Do you find them?
No, so it's a really good question. So we're really lucky that we have access to a huge amount of data. So we use data on individuals and we use data on schools. A good example, right? So there's a measure called POLAR, which is an area-based indicator. So what that means is what proportion of the population in that postcode, in these postcodes, go on to higher education. And even within the same place, so you could have a high proportion of students going to or people going to university down the road from an area when hardly anyone does. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really specific measure. The thing about POLAR, right, is though that it doesn't measure deprivation. It only measures who's going to university. And so what we do is we triangulate against other data points like eligibility for free school meals, like ratio of free school meals in the school, for example, or whether parents have gone to higher education themselves. So we use all this data to sort of get an understanding of where what the government used to call cold spots. So as part of the levelling up agenda, there's particular regions of the country often that are most likely to have their populations not going on to higher education. In particular, I can give you some specific, so rural areas is often the one, because it's where do we go? If there's not a university within a few miles of you, where are you going to go, right? It's much easier when you sort of can visually see a concrete building, or maybe not a concrete building, but a physical building, right? Yeah. Somewhere within your vicinity. But post-industrial northern towns are often underrepresented at university, and coastal regions. So we kind of have all of these data sources that we use to make decisions. But you're quite right, we can't help everyone in every context. And so we just do what we can with the resources we have, and hopefully we're making the biggest impact with the capacity that we have.
People take note. Listen to what this man is saying and help if we can. Yeah. And
it's not just, I just want to point out, it's not just Cambridge, right? Every university does this. Yeah. Every further education college has probably has an outreach capacity. So there's all thousands of people who are trying to make a difference in these institutions that people just might not be aware of. And so I think it's worth just a shout out to everyone who's doing it. Yeah.
Every place who's trying. Okay. Yeah. But you're just the face of it.
Yeah. No. Today anyway.
Yeah, I'm joking. Yeah, could you explain what the Access and Participation Plan is and how it guides the University of Cambridge in meeting its commitments and targets for widening participation?
Yeah, so I mentioned Ofsted for school. So if you like, we have an Ofsted for higher education that's called the Office for Students. They're the regulator. And what that means is that they hold universities to account on whether we're meeting our commitments to equality of opportunity for different students. So what this does is like a sort of a document, right? And it sets out what we're going to do to essentially reduce the gaps between where there's discrepancies between access rates between different groups. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's not just about, like you mentioned earlier, like how do you make sure that they're okay once they're at the institution? So that also is taken into account through the APP. Okay. So we look across the whole student life cycle. So we look at like how many students are getting into university, which students are they, where are their gaps? We look at on course, are they being successful? Are the degree outcomes, are they doing as well as other students, and where are the gaps there? And then we also look at whether they're going on to have successful careers after university. So we look like across the whole piece. Mm-hmm. Where are we doing things well? Where are we doing things not so well? And when there are risks to equality of opportunity, that's where we will set up specific interventions to try and close that gap and make things more equal.
Looking ahead, what trends or changes do you foresee in the landscape of widening participation, and how can institutions adapt to meet evolving challenges?
Yeah. So one big challenge we're facing as a sector is that so we're in the middle of a population boom period. So, 18 years ago, there was a population growth spurt, right? And so that obviously affects, how many students are going on to higher education.
I mean, I didn't actually know that, but this is news to me.
it goes in cycles, right?
Okay.
So you have, it's like after the World War, there's a massive baby boom because
everyone's back and celebrating.
Everyone's back and celebrating.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so these things kind of go in cycles, but we are now about 750,000 students, right, apply to go to university each year. At 18, I think it is. And by 2030, they're expecting that number to go up to 1 million, right? So that's a 25% increase in the next 5, 6, 7 years. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that there's only limited amount of potentially space, at these universities. Also, it's like, where are they going to live? They've got to live somewhere. So if there's not the infrastructure to support all these students, and the towns have got to support, these students. Like Cambridge is a university town. A lot of our population is a good proportion of our population is students, right? Yeah. So we have another university, ARU, another fantastic. In fact, they just won University of the Year, ARU. So shout out to them as well. Fantastic university, ARU. They've got campuses in Peterborough and Cambridge and Chelmsford. But you can imagine there's a lot of students like knocking around, in our city. And so what do we do when there's more of them and only limited amounts of space? And what we need to be really careful of is whether it's who's going to not benefit, so who's going to be squeezed by this population growth. And what I don't want to happen is it to be the least advantaged students, So we need to be really careful about making sure that we are still proportional to the population, even as the population grows. Mm-hmm. So that's like one big challenge. Second challenge might be around things like AI, right? And AI in education. How's technology going to affect the way that education is delivered, the experience? There's also, we talked about sort of flexibility with regards to my job, but there's also flexibility with regards to like how you deliver a degree, right? So should we only be delivering 3-year degrees to 18-year-olds, or should we look at more flexible ways where you can engage as an adult learner and do certain modules? And should Cambridge be part of that? There's like all these big questions about how we deliver education and how that's going to change with technology.
On the note of AI, I'm just thinking back to like application processes and writing statements.
Yeah.
Do we feel like AI might play a part there where people, I suppose, aren't putting in the work because they feel like, oh, this machine might be able to write it better than I do?
Yeah, well, I think the way you got to think about it is you can either fight it or you can embrace it. Mm-hmm. And so I think the right option is to embrace it. And there's some stuff that AI cannot replace. Like, I think creativity is a really difficult concept for any computer to get its head around.
Give it time.
I
hear you.
So I think we've got to embrace that that's part of it and sort of accept it into the fold while still being able to, hold students and hold universities to account for the standards of education they deliver. Same problem facing schools, right? And lots of... and lots of areas.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm not even going to answer that question. So we've spoken so much about, education, the barriers, widening participation. In terms of your specific job, first question is, and I love asking this question on the podcast, what is the most stressful aspect of your job?
I think sometimes what stresses me out is kind of that thing about why I moved into the sector in the first place, is that the problems are so big and so vast and so many of them that sometimes it can feel like you're running to standstill. So, you're doing all of this work and access gaps aren't closing at the rate that you'd want them to. In the same way that in schools, the gap between the most advantaged and the less advantaged students, it just hasn't closed in like 10 years, at all. And so sometimes we feel like all of the work that we're putting in is just to like maintain as opposed to actually, make things better. And a lot of this, and for me, that stresses me out,
Of course.
So that can be quite stressful, but there's all day-to-day, pressures of like,
and like the
coming on podcast, that's stressful.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that, because the inequality gap, it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The rich keep getting richer, and like we say, we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. So maintaining, whilst it might not seem like a win, with everything else that's going on, you actually have to look at the positives. I'm not going to say take it as a win, but we have to look at the good that is being done in that instance. But if we just switch gears on that, so we've spoken about the most stressful thing. What would you say the most rewarding part of your job is?
I think lots of things. I mean, I'm very lucky. I'm in. First, it's a job that I love because I like the fact that we're affecting change and making a difference. But there's nothing more rewarding than when a young person, when that light bulb moment happens and you see that they just have like totally got it and that they're going to go on and do amazing things. And we get feedback from our programs, and students essentially have just, their lives have been entirely changed. Parents' lives have been entirely changed. One thing I didn't actually mention about, just to go back to parent power, right? Something that I found incredible and rewarding is that although the program was kind of designed for the parents to support their children and young people, one of the byproducts that we hadn't expected is that parents went back into education themselves. Because they kind of thought, well, if I know all this stuff about it and how it works, then I can do it myself. And I can also act as as a role model, develop lived experience of doing it myself. Like if I can do it, why can't my child do it? Right. And so they kind of stepped up as role models, even whilst, working maybe 2-3 jobs in some cases, incredible people. And they found a way to go back into higher education themselves and make their own, make better themselves. And so that's been incredible. And when you talk to parents about that, when you talk to kids about how these programs, how their experience at Cambridge might change their lives, I think that's pretty incredible.
Sick. We also like to ask on a podcast, so of all the people that like work in your sector and all of, these incredible parents and people that you work with, what would you say is a common skill you see amongst the most successful people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, you kind of have to develop the ability to get up again when you take a knock. And so some people might call it resilience, or sort of anti-fragility. But I think you often see people who get into this sector often have done it for a reason, like maybe they've experienced some of the barriers to educational opportunity themselves. And so that is usually can be a factor, like a real driving force. And one of the things I always think is common to anyone who's experienced, disadvantage and maybe difficulties in their life is that gives you a set of skills that you can't replicate. So people who have had life easy, say you've swum through life and you've gone
don't have to deal with adversity,
money, and not had to deal with much adversity. Like you're never going to be able to develop the skills that those people who have gone through that have got. And so you often see these people, like amazingly resilient people who are able to like go above and beyond because they're driven by something more than just their job. They're driven by the values that they have. And ultimately, like that's what life's about, right? It's about living your values.
100%. We're going to switch up the gear slightly because I know we spoke kind of off camera. You obviously have the deputy head of Widening participation. You mentioned the fact that you also sit on the board of trustees at a couple of places. So you want to just like elaborate a little bit on those other roles that you're part of and how it all comes together?
Yeah, sure. So that's an important thing actually. I'm a big advocate for volunteering. You know, I think like there's a whole, anyone can go and be of benefit to their community through volunteering, right? And so through sitting on the board of 2 charities now, one is a national charity called the Thomas Wall Trust, and that what we do through the Thomas Wall Trust is we help people to develop who need to get qualifications with individuals. We help them to get qualifications that they can go on to go and do a certain profession or certain job.
Sick.
So skills, it's like a skills-based charity. We also help small charities who want to help people develop skills. Like we support the charities with grants as well. So it's a grant making charity.
I'm just going to say it right now. I feel like both charities, maybe they need like some podcasting resources to give people just some ideas on what people do for work. Yeah, good idea. Do you know what I mean? Good idea. I like it. Okay, so
that's one. And so the other thing I didn't really talk about that I'm really interested in is that I grew up in Cambridge, right? Mm-hmm. So I saw this university in front of me that me and my mates like wouldn't necessarily have considered going to because of these perceptions of elitism, you know, that I understand, right? And in fact, one of the things we didn't even talk about was that like people think that it's full of private school kids. Cambridge, right? And Oxford, right? Yeah. And so maybe, Eton,
like you said, right, them brothers from Eton. Yeah.
So let me ask you then, maybe just to flip it a little bit. Yeah. It's like, so what percentage of students do you think are state school versus private school? You know, as a percentage, what do you think it is? Bro,
definitely more private than state. I would say like 70-30.
Yeah. Right.
To 70-30 private to state.
Yeah. So that's probably about the typical sort of response. Maybe I've heard like 99%.
Not mad.
But it's almost the exact opposite. So it's about the last intake was 73% state school that went into Cambridge, right? That we had last year. So people don't know that, and that's really important because it means that when you go to this university, more than likely is the person next to you is going to be from a state school background too, like more than 2/3 of our students are. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with private school and private school students, right? The whole thing that I advocate for is that all of these different backgrounds, like that's part of the brilliance of universities, that you get to meet people from all different backgrounds, from all different areas, from all different school types, and they all come together because they love their subject, right? All of that stuff just falls by the wayside because they're there to have the experience of university or the University of Cambridge in particular, right? And so that's like an amazing thing, I think. But it's really important that people also know that people like them are in these institutions. And so we also have like a bunch of these societies for specific groups. So we might have like we have a society for working class students. We have a society for anything you can pretty much imagine, right? Every ethnic group or disabled students like society, right? So people can understand that, so feel that sense of belonging maybe where they might not feel it around some of the people that they meet initially, and so they can meet groups of like-minded people.
And is this specifically at University of Cambridge?
Yeah, so we do that there, but again, like all universities are conscious of this thing about belonging, right? And feeling like you belong is really important, you know. And so that's what we try to foster. I actually can't remember what the original
question was. So the original question
about
was
the trustees.
Yeah, about the trustees. You mentioned the first one, and then I feel like you were explaining what the second one was.
I've just joined a second charity called the Cambridgeshire Community Foundation, and that's like you're saying because I'm from Cambridge, right? That was what I was getting at. So because I came from Cambridge and saw this, if you like, town and gown divide, right? So that there was the university, and then there was everything else in the city. So I'm a really big advocate that universities play their part in the civic and community engagement and civic agenda, which means like, what is the university's responsibility to the place in which they sit? As massive employers, as massive institutions, my view is that they should be giving back to that community, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested in that and seeing what the university can do to support the region around it. And so I've joined this charity as a trustee that essentially supports that objective of like reducing inequality. Cambridge, by a measure, is the most unequal city in the UK. So by salary discrepancy, which means that the people who have the top however many percent, I think top 7%, have as much wealth as like the bottom whatever.
Disgraceful.
Percent, right? Yeah.
Disgraceful.
So, yeah, exactly. But you can easily see how that might happen in a city that's extremely wealthy. Like we have a load of we're a really entrepreneurial city, right? That's why Michael Gove wants to make it the Silicon Valley of the UK. We have loads of science and entrepreneurial businesses that pop up often through the university, you know, like that incubates them. And so it creates a city where there's a lot of inequality because we have a lot of people with a lot of money, but also equally a lot of people who are being left behind by cost of living and all the other factors that we talked about. So I want to give back in that sense. And then finally, because I was a teacher and I still like passionately believe that schools have one of the most important parts to play in any, you know, functioning society. So I chair the governing body at a school down the road from me, which means that I sort of hold the head teacher to account in terms of like supporting and challenging the school and his decisions.
It sounds like you do a lot though, John. And I think where I was going with all that is, do you have any productivity hacks?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm pretty organized, you know, like I manage my time really carefully because I've also got a baby and like want to balance my time with that. And in fact, I work 4-day weeks, so I've compressed my hours. I'm really fortunate that my employer, the university, is really flexible around. They have a really good flexible work policy. So I spend Mondays with my daughter, and then the other 4 days I work longer hours. So I work slightly longer hours, you know, Tuesday to Friday to sort of make up that extra day. But in terms of like productivity, I'm really big on something. So it's actually a technique that I teach students, right? When I'm doing revision skills sessions. It's called the Pomodoro technique. I don't know if it's come up before, but essentially you spend 25 minutes doing intensive work with a timer, and you take a 5-minute break, and then you do another 25 minutes and a 5-minute break. And then after you've done 3 or 4 cycles, you take a longer break, right? But having like specifically knowing you've got 25 minutes and then you get a break, it really increases your focus and intensity of work, like for that period. And then you get regular breaks. And so it's like, you know, it's research informed and it's proven to increase productivity.
And when you're doing that, is like phone out the room or phone on silent?
Yeah, so you sort of have to focus on that task. Yeah, so often what I say to students is exactly that, like leave your phone outside, right? And then you've got your 5-minute break after 25 minutes anyway. So just focus on that task for a manageable period of time, right?
We actually have had that on the podcast, but they use an app. I think it was like the Bear Timer app.
Oh, right.
So yeah, there's like a few apps that help with that, but that's actually really beneficial. Yes, all right. So yeah, you mentioned the fact that obviously you've got compressed hours. So would you say you've got a good work-life balance?
Yeah, I think I do. You know, I think I feel very lucky in how I get to manage my time a lot of the time. And I'm still, you know, I like working hard, you know, and I also have high expectations, you know, of my team and people I work with, because ultimately in our sector, we're trying to change young people's lives. And so I don't, you know, to be honest, I don't have a lot of time for people who don't take that seriously. Like our job is serious business, and we're trying to make things better for a lot of people, for a lot of young people, and a lot of their support networks. And so I think it's really important that you're really committed to it, but equally totally appreciate that you need to have a work-life balance. And I think particularly maybe compared to when I was working in senior leadership in schools, you know, I feel like I have a much more flexible way of approaching work.
Nice. And on that, obviously, it sounds like you work hard and you're part of a lot of things, or part of, a lot of trusts, boards, etc. How do you unwind when you're not thinking about work?
Yeah. I mean, my time is pretty limited, but I do unwind. You know, I play football still. You know, I didn't ever realize that dream, but I still play, even though I should probably hang up my boots soon. And I read. I still read a lot. You know, like non-fiction and fiction. But I also like cooking. So I think one of the things is like, if it's a choice between, you know, bath time and bedtime for the baby or cooking, like I'll often do the cooking, and my wife often does the
bath and bedtime.
Baby, yeah.
Love that. I've got 2 questions that are linked. So first things first, for anybody who's looking to get into like your area of work, right? Widening participation, potentially working in higher education. Yeah. What would your advice be to them, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I think that is important is to probably have gone through the education system yourself. I think it's quite difficult to be in a position to advise other young people, you know, or other young people about the university experience unless you've kind of done it yourself. Because I kind of worries me that about people who automatically say you need a degree to do this, because I don't think that's true in lots of cases. But I think probably to do the type of work we do, which is about improving access to higher education, you probably should have gone, you know, yourself. But I think what to always think about is like, well, what underlies the job? And it's like the skills that fall beneath that. So, you know, you can imagine teachers are often going to be really good candidates for this sector because they're good at project management. You know, they're good at being organized. They're good at, they've delivered presentations day in, day out to young people. They're really confident about how to make sure that knowledge is learned effectively, you know, and all of this stuff is relevant to to our job. But we also get lots of applicants to positions that are not from teaching backgrounds, but they are often really empathetic. They often have lived experience, that they're able to have a sort of empathy for others, but being really organized is really helpful. So project management, for example, if you've got project management background, that's really helpful because that's what a lot of like running programs is, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you got to kind of be comfortable with being in front of other people, like that's not for everyone. Like working with hundreds of kids on a summer school can be quite chaotic, and you kind of got to be comfortable with that, like things are going to go wrong. So being sort of able to react to change quickly and be comfortable with that. But there's no like one thing. So I just think if you care about making the world a better place, and you've got, some of these skills that I've just spoken about, then it could be the right sector for you.
Okay. And then, so we've spoken about it from, I suppose, a working perspective. For maybe the younger listener who's considering their options for university, what would your advice be to them?
I think my advice for that is probably like think about what you're really good at and think about what you really like. Like those two things are by far the most important factors that should come into it. Don't go to a university because your mates go there. Go there, like I said, go to the course, not the institution, So just think really carefully about what it is that really interests you, that like sparks that passion inside you, and follow that, because you can't go far wrong.
I love it. Final thing before we get into the quickfire round, where does John see himself in the next 5 and 10 years?
Wow, it's a big question, isn't it?
We like to do a lot of introspection here on this podcast.
I think I'd like to, continue developing like the strategic elements of my role, maybe moving into a more senior position. And I'm not going to lie, I'm very ambitious, and I want to, because I believe that, the biggest difference you make tends to be, or have the most influence over how things are done, is more senior you are, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to be in a position where I'm dictating the strategy so that we're having the biggest impact on the biggest number of, young people ultimately.
Fair.
So right. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Oh no, sorry.
No.
I've cut you up. Okay, great. And then, sorry, I said that was the last question. There's actually one more. Yeah. For any young person who's potentially looking into this, we got any resources we should guide them towards to potentially learn more about higher education and maybe Cambridge?
So I think the best thing to do is often to talk to your local university or the universities that you're interested in, because they will have all sorts of resources out there. Mm. It can be quite overwhelming. So my advice would be to like think about where you're interested in. Just start with the local university, is often a good place. And they will have all sorts of resources likely to help you. But, there's websites like Informed Choices, which is specifically for Russell Group, students who are considering Russell Group institutions, which is like the top 20 most sort of research intensive universities. Yeah. There's also UCAS, they have a world of support, and you can just Google this stuff, and there's just infinite amount. You can go on the University of Cambridge's website, and there's all sorts of support out there.
So Google's your friend.
Google's your friend, yeah.
Always. John, this has been such an enlightening conversation. I really hope that the listener has found this as informative as I have. I know they will. Now just to get to learn a bit more about you. Okay, so just got a little quick fire round. Work from home or work from the office?
Work from home.
Okay. Although I feel like you have to go into the office and on site a lot. Money or happiness?
Happiness.
Of course. Favourite day of the week?
Monday with my daughter.
Oh, lovely. Time in a group or time alone?
Time in a group.
Love that. Would you rather travel to the past or future?
Oh, probably the future.
Love that. Favourite book?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it? So there's a book by Jeffrey Archer, who was a politician, right? And so I think if you disregard his political sort of background,
great caveat. Okay.
I'm gonna have to caveat that, right? Because people, have differing views. I don't want to get into politics, but there's a book called Cain and Abel, right? And it's essentially about sort of, if you like, opportunity, right? And it's an amazing book, and it follows the two main characters, and their sort of worlds coincide at a certain point. But it's like an amazing narrative, and he's an amazing storyteller, I think.
Okay, Cain and Abel, I heard that. Night out or night in?
Night in.
I'm going to ask you, who has it easier, men or women?
Men.
Okay, good. I thought he was about to say no one has it easier. Name a book that you think everyone should read. Is it going to be Cain and Abel?
I think maybe Atomic Habits actually. By James Clear.
Man, I'm just finishing at the moment. Yeah, I'm about 3/4 of the way through.
Yeah.
Definitely changing my frame. Have I been able to implement any of what I've read in the book yet? I think some things, but not as much as I would like, is what I'd say.
What I love about it is that like it's a really clear framework for improvement.
100%.
So I think anyone, if you're interested in improving yourself, and I think why wouldn't you be? Then it's a really good way to do that.
And sorry, I know this is a quick fire, but I actually want to I think one of the ways to know that you've learned something is by speaking about it.
Yeah.
I think one of my big takeaways from the Atomic Habits book is reframing things. So it's like, rather than I have a big thing of like getting up early to go to the gym, rather than, oh my God, it's dark, it's cold, I don't want to go to the gym. You reframe it as, today I'm going to make myself healthier. It's like, by changing your frame, you're more likely to complete the action. So look, James Clear, you're welcome. And then, final question. Are you listening to any good podcasts?
This one,
come on, what my best friend does.
I listen to a few. I mean, a lot of them around like educational policy, so it might not be of interest to the whole world.
You never know, mate.
I like Diary of a CEO as well, and I listen to a food podcast as well. So Jay Rayner and is a food critic, and Grace Dent is another food critic. So I listen to
she was on I'm a Celeb for about a week, and then she
I think she had help from.
I had no idea who she was before that, but now I know.
I tell you one more, right? And this is because I love words, right? So we're called logophiles, right? There's like a word. There's a word for people who love words, and there's a podcast called Something Rhymes with Purple. And Susie Dent, she's from Countdown.
I think I do.
You might know her. So she's like Dictionary Corner on Countdown, and a guy called Giles Brandreth, who's like a sort of personality, and they just talk about words, and it is incredible. I might actually take that up, because I thought that ain't rhyme with purple and orange, but here we go. I'm sure that's like a whole play on words, but I'm gonna... So the word that rhymes with purple is hurple, and what that means is to walk with a limp. So
really? There you go. You learned that on the pod?
I learned it on the pod,
John, this has been so sick. So we do have a closing tradition on this pod, and basically we've had a great conversation, and based on everything that you know now and everything that you've been through, what advice would you give your younger self, your 16-year-old self, and would you still be doing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think I'd still be doing the same thing, or at least something with purpose, right? So just one more story, if you like.
Yeah, please.
I actually bumped into one of my old bosses the other day. It wasn't the other day, it was months ago. It was a few months ago. And it was when I worked in recruitment, right? So, and he said to me, we were going to set up this business together, right? Because it was quite a niche sort of area of recruitment that we worked in. And we had these ideas about setting up this business together. And he said, I've gone ahead and done that. And he said, but if you'd done it, you'd have been rich, but you'd have been miserable. And I was like, I think that's exactly right. Like, I think if you feel like you've got, you want to do something that has social purpose, money's never going to make you happy. So, that kind of like was I thought that when he said that, I was like, that's
you
exactly
made the right
right
decision. Yeah, love it. John, this has been such a great conversation. I know I've said it multiple times. Where can people kind of get you out on socials? Yeah,
so I'm on Twitter, or X as it's called now, Data John, which is easy. And then on LinkedIn, it's just John Data. So you can find me on there for professional networking sites.
Love it. John, this has been such a great episode, man. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been another episode of What My Best Friend Does. If you didn't know, now you know.